Hello and welcome back to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. Today we are talking with Bex Carlos. Bex is a podcaster, cafe owner, tarot reader, tarot deck creator, and an advocate for marginalized voices. We are very excited to talk with you today, so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for being so patient because unintentionally or not, I just feel like I'm always being pulled in a million directions. So I'm glad that today y'all get my attention and direction.
We are too, and not a problem. We understand being pulled in multiple directions. And I mean, just like what I read about you, you have your hands in a lot of different projects. So of course your energy is being pulled in a lot of different directions. It makes sense.
Truly.
We understand that. So I always like to start with people like, where did this all begin for you? Like, where did your spiritual journey begin? How'd you get into being, a tarot card reader? Tell us about that.
Sure. So I always feel like I had this sensitivity and awareness of energies around me. Uh, and just like I guess like had a lot of unexplainable things happen. Like someone told me like what was that first moment for you when you realized that you had this sensitivity? And I was like there's so many, and lately as I think about it more we kind of get further down the rabbit hole. But I remember one time I was home alone and I had had an aunt who passed, and it was one of those where my mom and her had a lot of beef before they passed. And I think that that's when you're the most likely at times when there is something that's left unsaid to get a lot of paranormal activity, because it's like that person's trying so hard at times, or sometimes an energy can mimic it, but that's a whole different topic. But I was sitting alone at home, and the stereo that we had, that my dad had, because my dad's a big music guy, it was one of those that had like a record player, and it had like, tapes and CDs and just this huge stereo. And he had it in the basement, but one of the speakers was down there and one of the speakers was upstairs. So I'm watching TV, and then all of a sudden, like the stereo turns itself on and is playing like the Eagles. And I'm like, oh, like, that's weird. Um, and I just remember like after my aunt passed, there was this like this it's like the kind of limit between the veil between like both worlds was kind of blurred. And a lot of, not even just like myself, but a lot of family members have memories of just really odd things happen. So I think that that was sort of when I really started to become aware of these things. It's like, because it's not just me, right? But I think other than like having these memories of weird things happening, I think what really kind of popped off was in 2015. I went to New Orleans, and I think like New Orleans is one of those places that if you have an interest for the esoteric or whatever like that, it's going to be set on fire. And so I bought like a few candles and some oils, and I came back, and then I really just, because I feel like my focus was like I don't want to work with these, and people work with goddesses, entities, whatever. I was always like I kind of just want to work with my ancestors. And I started just getting signs from the universe that were just like you're going in the right direction. And I've always been someone who has felt very strongly about racial inequity and racial prejudice. And from the time that I was a little girl, like I have this very distinct memory of watching a horrible movie in which like a black man was lynched. And that, like, I had to be like 4 or 5 when I saw that. And I feel like that was something that really imprinted on me in a way that like there is so much injustice in the world. And I feel like the more that I got into magic, the more I realized that like social justice and magic go hand in hand.
Mm.
And magic is a way that a lot of marginalized communities figured out ways to protect themselves. Um, and so I feel like the more that I did work related to social justice, the more signs that I had from the universe that were like, you're doing what you're supposed to do. And I feel like that makes me feel like I'm on the right path, and that like I like to think that nothing is for nothing, like everything. And I hate the everything happens for a reason, because sometimes the reason is like colonial bullshit.
Hmm.
But I think that we can take away things from things that happen to us and experiences. And yeah, the more that I started really caring about activism, I feel like the more that I started just having signs from the universe. I feel like my ancestors speaking to me. And yeah, it's just been something where I'm like, I could not make this up. Like, there are so many moments in my life that feel like this is such main character energy. And I'm like, is a bitch mentally ill or has she like broken the code of like, the universe of the simulation, so to speak? And maybe it's both. Who knows? Two things can be true at the same time. But yeah, so that sort of got me into a lot of, I don't know, studying like esoteric and like all of these different things. And then I kind of got to tarot. Do you remember the days when Twitter was cool and you could like have such meaningful conversations? I had a friend who was in Ireland and was in grad school at the time and was looking for something to do as a final project. And I had like jokingly been like, hey, it's the 50th anniversary of Stonewall this year. You should make like a tarot deck inspired by like queer individuals. And so it's funny, they took that idea and they ran with it. And originally it was like all of these famous people, but then there was a lot of like hoops to jump through to do that. So they were like, what if we just do like 78 faces of like the community? And it's so cool that that led us to create the Queers and Queens tarot deck. And
Nice.
it's so funny. At the time, I didn't know anything about tarot. So it was like we had this idea, we started doing it, and then like we had this idea, we started doing it, and then all of a sudden it was like, okay, and how do we figure this out? And it was funny because like we did that, and then a friend of my friend who was the artist was sort of like, well, I know tarot. And so it was like we all just found each other and it was this beautiful deck that I'm really glad to have been a part of. And so that started my journey with that. And I'm a big like learn as you do person. So because I created this tarot deck, it was a lot easier for me to learn and study and just kind of interpret them. And yeah, so I hope that answered your question. I threw a lot of information at you, but I just feel like life has been the thing that leads me to everything. And I'm just so grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like you're being guided. I love that you like knew nothing about tarot and took on the project of creating a tarot deck. I mean, that is, I think a way to deep dive and really learn the system. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I will say that like a lot of the people who ended up being like the representation for certain cards, like when I was just like, I wonder why they chose this card, and that would send me into deep dives, like what
Mm.
is this? What is the meaning of this card? And yeah, I do have an appreciation for the fact that I've always been someone that when I'm really interested in something, I like hyperfixate and I can't let it go. And for better or worse, I feel like that's made me a stronger practitioner because I don't, not to say that I take it very seriously, because I also think that like magic has a fun element. Like I like to
Mm.
combine aspects of like Y2K culture because that was so influential for me into my magic. So it's like you have to take it seriously, but you have to have like a sense of humor about it too. And I don't know. My sister and I were having a conversation the other day about like Greek mythology or and how like the thing that's the best about it is that you identify at times with the gods because they're just made to seem like people who are normal. It's like one day you just caught them in a bad day and that's why you were punished, or you made them feel insignificant. And I don't know, I've always kind of seen that approach to like, whatever the higher power is. I don't know. I don't like to say that I believe in the aspect of God, but if I did, I have more of a deist approach to it where it's like the being created everything and we were like a fun little ant farm for a while and then they got bored and moved on and now we've just been running amok.
So tell us a little bit what you mean about like integrating Y2K culture into like your practice. What does that look like exactly?
Sure. So I first of all, I think that like the early 2000s and what it's so funny to me because you'll say Y2K and you'll think it's specifically like 2000, but it really starts from like 97 to about 2004. It was all of that time, but the music, I feel like we were going through kind of a cultural music revolution. So I do a lot of work with music. So like it's called canticomancy or radiomancy, or some people say shufflemancy, which are all different forms of like working with music as a form of divination. So personally, I when I was younger, I always wanted an iPod. So that is something that I now use as a form of divination. So, but I use my iPod as a form of divination. So sometimes when I'm really unsure about life, I just put it on shuffle and I'll listen to like the first three songs. And I feel like they all kind of tell me something that I need to hear. And I've been very intentional with how I specifically play my iPod. Even when I'm just like walking my dog, I'm taking away notes from like the songs and what specifically comes up. Um, I also like one of the things that I really enjoy about the Y2K era is honestly the makeup. A lot of holographic, really bright like colors. And I like that that's sort of coming back too. And I think that a lot of people don't think about this, but like when you're putting on makeup and stuff and you're really going into your day kind of like, this is what I'm expecting to get out of it. This is what I'm trying to like, the energy that I'm trying to put out. Like that's a form of magic. That's glamour magic. So I really like being able to use like fun holographic makeup and just things that like really help portray me in a way that I want to be perceived. It's funny because I'm such a Halloween babe, and I loved that Profusion collaborated with like the Casper the Friendly Ghost, and they did like a whole makeup line. And if I wasn't already sold on the fact that it's Casper, it was all very like holographic and Y2K inspired. And I was like, okay, these are great elements to incorporate into my practice. I have a lava lamp from when I was young. I saw The Exorcist way too young and it terrified the living shit out of me. And I feel like I felt like I was like, I don't want to have a nightlight. Like that's for little kids. I'm a big girl, you know? So it's my parents got me a lava lamp and that was my nightlight because a lava lamp's cool. So as an adult, I still have that lava lamp and I use that like as a form of divination too. So for me, there's all these different ways that you can do magic. And I think that that's the thing with a lot of people nowadays is they want things spoon fed to them, how they should practice. And some things do need procedures and rituals and things like that. I'm not going to say that they don't. But I think that if you are waiting for someone to tell you how to do magic, then how is that different from religion? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's like I like finding fun little things that send messages to me. And so looking back to like the Y2K era and all the things that, when I was in grade school, middle school, that really influenced my life, I feel have been really important and beneficial in my practice now. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, definitely. You have to tell us how you use the lava lamp for divination. I need to know this. It's so
Sure.
cool.
So my method is like, so I turn on the lava lamp and I kind of sit because like, it takes a while for the wax to warm up. And I really focus on like what I want things to mean. So I'll be like, okay, like small bubbles mean yes, big bubbles mean no.
Okay.
And then I'll kind of like, as I kind of see it starting to do its thing, I'll let it kind of do it. And then I'll ask a question that I know the answer to. And so like if it does it correctly, then I'm like, okay, like we're in sync. And it doesn't always work. I feel like because I have a divination coin too. A couple of times I'll ask it a question of like, hey, my name is like, is this yes or no? And then they'll say no. It's like, okay, you're not feeling up for it, because I think the tools that you use eventually do kind of get frustrated and kind of have like a personality of their own. And
Hmm.
sometimes they're like, we don't want to deal with your bullshit. It's like, that's cool. Sometimes I don't want to deal with my bullshit.
So with the nature of these types of things not being 100% repeatable all the time, which is really what kind of sets it apart from being science, is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Sometimes we have kind of this dichotomy in our society that something is either, it's either scientific or it's not, or it's either religious or it's not. And there's not a lot of room for a lot of people's minds for that possible third thing. And I think that this type of stuff kind of makes that space.
Yeah, and I like to think that magic is what science hasn't proven yet, because who's, because at the end of the day, my whole philosophy is like, is it really hurting anybody if I put all of my energy into like making this happen? Like people do that when they pray, people do that, when they're just wishing well on people. So it's like, if I am intentionally using something, doing something, whatever, and it makes me just feel happier, even if it's like a placebo effect, then it's like, okay, like let it happen. But I don't know. I want to give this example because I do again think that, like I said, magic is the thing that science can't explain. For a while, I got really sick and I wasn't sure what was going on with me. And it was really difficult when you go to the doctor and you go to the doctor, you go to the emergency room, you go to all these places where you assume they're going to be able to give you insight on what's wrong with you and nobody knows. And because again, I'm an esoteric girly, I was in Mexico and someone told me about a curandera, which is like a folk healer, if you will. And I went and she had done a reading for me. And it was interesting because she pulled out this thing that was kind of gross. And you use an egg kind of to just like remove energy. So she had told me, somebody sent something to you to destroy your body. And I was like, weird. But then, because I kind of like saw how she did it, I did it myself and I had like read a little bit on it. So I wasn't completely out of the dark. And I can send you the photos later, but I pulled something like went energy wise and it was like black. It was black. And I was just like, okay, that's weird. And I did another one. And I noticed that was like, okay, I'm not really sure what that is, but that's making me really aware that there's something wrong. So after that, I kept searching, I kept searching. And so eventually I had to go to the ER because I was having like some weird stomach pains and I was like, I don't know what's wrong. That was the first time that they had thought to do a bottom half like CT scan because I guess they'd always focused on the top. And so when they did that, they noticed that there was a teratoma on my right ovary. And when I looked at the photo of the teratoma versus like the photo that I took of what the cleansing looked like, it's very similar looking. And that's why I'm just like, and I know that there are people who are skeptical and they're just like, I don't, I need concrete evidence. And that's fine. But there's things that sometimes I'm like, I don't know, like I can't prove this, but I feel it so deeply in my bones that I'm like, this is real. And, I also think that one thing that's really underestimated about like the paranormal is I feel like the people who tend to have more of a sensitivity to the paranormal are people who have experienced a lot of trauma.
Sure.
Most of the people that I know that have psychic abilities are somewhere on the neurodivergent spectrum. And, we were talking about how I live in Mexico, and this town of Tequila has seen a lot of intense things happen, because Mexico is like, it's the Wild West in a lot of ways, like people have their own justice. And just recently, there was like a really traumatic accident associated with one of the tequila factories. A tank like flew in the air, some like 500 meters. It fell in this space and it killed, I think to date, 7 workers. And like, that's like a shared trauma that us in the town have now experienced, know? And it's one of those things that I really do think that the more that you see some of the ugly, weird freak accidents in humanity, weird accidents, tragic, traumatic things, it changes the way that you see the world. And I think because of that does make you more susceptible to the feelings associated with just like, because my whole thing also with like ghosts, I feel like ghosts, if you will, like are just the energies of people who are stuck because they're not super sure what happened. And okay, funny to bring up Casper again, but like Dr. Harvey is a ghost like therapist. And I'm like, I kind of think that that's what it is for people. It's like they're stuck in that fragment of time because they don't really understand all the circumstances of like either around their death, but there are spirits that are like stuck that, they were in a place even before they died. So maybe something happened to them there. So I don't know. That's my big thing. I think that like there's a deep correlation between trauma and mediumship because the more that you see about human suffering, the more it kind of makes you aware of just energies. dead or
Yeah.
alive.
I mean, I think, even some scientific evidence to support what you're saying, because when you've experienced trauma, you start to become more hypervigilant to your surroundings, right? And so people who have experienced a lot of trauma will be sensitive to what's happening because it's a form of protection, right? I have to know like what's in my surroundings. I need to know how these people, I need to be able to read this person's energy to know if I'm safe or not. So I feel like in terms of that, it just is expanded to like being aware and sensitive to all of the energies around you. I think that makes a lot of sense to me, anyways.
Yeah.
Important to know with science and stuff like, science is very new in the scheme of, human history. I mean, you can make the argument that Isaac Newton was the first real scientist, and he did most of his work in the late 1600s. That's, I mean, to you and me, I mean, I'm 43, so that sounds like a long time ago, but in the history of like, humanity, that was yesterday. So, to pretend that we know everything that we're gonna know is ridiculous.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm a big believer in like we do have to take from the people that came before us because they had to survive sometimes in like some of the most like extreme conditions, for lack of a better term, whether it was just the racial discrimination they felt, whether it was
Mhm.
just like injustice, whether it was just like, because people had to tolerate a lot back then,
Mhm.
like I I think that it's so wonderful that we are in a time, and people might disagree with me, where young people are just like, yeah, I'd rather not like be disrespected for like a wage that isn't really worth my time at the end of the
Mhm.
day. Because I think that the problem, and like I say this myself, like as a millennial, like I graduated in 2009. So that was right after the big housing crash. And I feel like we went into college knowing like you take whatever job you get. And, I wonder if more people would have been aware to just like the socioeconomic circumstances of everything, if we would have fought for more and been on the side, of like, let's gang together to like to demand things that we deserve, like I wonder if things would be different. But I think that so many people were just operating out of a scarcity, um you know uh
Mhm.
and we see that also because like since like 2000, from 99 on, it just seems like we have been like dealing with trauma after trauma after trauma, and like life event. So it's also like I can understand why so many people did just tolerate what was given to them, but I don't know. It gives me faith in the young people because they're just like, no, we deserve better. And I'm like, you're right, kids. We do deserve better.
Yeah. I'm definitely with you there. And I mean, I think we both feel the exact same way of like, nobody deserves to be mistreated, at a job. I mean, people deserve to be paid fair wages so that they can live, you
Yeah.
know? It's awful
And
oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, it's completely awful what happened in your community. My heart goes out to everybody who's experienced that, who's lost somebody. How would you say the community is doing, like recovering from this massive trauma?
I think it's difficult because I've been doing a lot of research on the area, the town or whatever. And what I find very fascinating is that history just always repeats itself. And this is like obviously the product of like tequila overconsumption and all of these different factors that force the town to have to cater to outsiders. And so it's like that was, I think I had mentioned this precast, like the irony that it happened on the eve of National Tequila Day, like
Hmm.
while everyone's drinking and celebrating and like, yay, tequila is this great spirit. Like the people who live here are being impacted again because like I tell people this all of the time, housing here is insane because most people want to charge a rent per day because they can make more per day than if they were to just like rent it out to a family in the community. And it sucks because it's created a very like dog eat dog situation. And I know that it isn't, just something that happens here. We see that in the United States, gentrification, pushing people out of the communities. But it is something that's really difficult here because it's like a place that has such a rich, beautiful history associated with like making this spirit. It seems like the people here have always been compromised for the making of the spirit. Like for example, I was doing research about why it was that the Spanish had so much interest in creating tequila, and it's because they were worried that they were going to run out of grapes for brandy. And when they would make brandy, there were all of these like sacraments, and it was like very religiously like, so it does kind of like suck, and it gives a punch to the gut that like the whole purpose that this land was colonized was for people to just drink. And so like we see it again with like this tragedy, like the fact that these people, and again, I don't want to like, there's been a lot of speculation on what's happened. There's been a lot of talk. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it really sucks that, these people who were working in this factory that creates, but it really sucks that people that were catering to these tanks that make so much liquor that then is sent all over the globe. It's just so tragic because it just reminds you that like sometimes here it's like the people who live here are second class citizens, and they shouldn't feel like that in a place that is their home.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's a lot of people are feeling like, why is it that like the powers that be don't always care? And
Mm-hmm.
that's a hard pill to swallow, when it's like you put so much into things. And I think that this is why I always tell people like, unless you find a really good job that takes care of you, and those are rare, that have loyalty to you, like you should not have loyalty to anybody, like as a company, because I don't know. I've also heard some really awful things about like tequila factories here, that there was a funeral for a bartender that died. And while all of these people were at his funeral, they posted the job on like Indeed or something. And again, I know that that's not like something that just happens here, but it really
Yeah.
does make you think that you can dedicate so much of your life, so much time, so much energy, and they don't even consider you to be a human.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like you're not even a person. You are just a
Labor.
part of the machine. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's awful. Tell us a little bit more about the town. When you responded to our questionnaire, you said like that this is a very like interesting and haunted town. So tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of going back, because I know I mentioned it, like the whole fact that it was colonized for the sake
Hmm.
of finding more things to drink. When the Spanish came here, they came with like 300 or 400 like Spaniards, and there were somewhere between like 3 to 5 thousand indigenous warriors, because the people who lived here they were very protective and kind of, I would even say like they were an intense people. So they kind of came in expecting like, we might have to kill everyone to like be on top, like to gain power over this. And so a lot of people died. And it's so funny. I was talking to my coworker today about how from the indigenous side, and even the African side, we get a lot of like um oral tradition, and that's how things were like kept, not that there weren't like ways of documenting, but a lot of the stories that we have are through oral tradition. And then on the Spaniard side, everything was documented. So when you can't find history, there's a reason for that, because they didn't want people to see these people as people. So there's just been, I feel like, a lot of death all around here. There's a folk saint named Padre Toribio, and he's very known. He's like a priest, and I feel like people, even if they don't know who he is, they've probably seen the imagery because he is such a big representation in like Mexican Catholicism. Um, and he died here because there was a thing called the Cristelo War, La Guerra Cristela. And basically, it was a time where the government was very like atheist. They were not religious. There was also a lot of people, the ways that like the clergy would maybe like abuse their powers in the community. Like people would confess to them like, oh, I stole this to like feed my family. And they would go and kind of tell the people who had the power to then harm them.
Mm.
And it was a very intense time. And I feel like a lot of people, wrongly assume the worst of all the clergy, because there were people who were just doing their job and like what they thought was the best with the knowledge they had. But Father Toribio was a saint that was murdered here, and he was murdered in what was called La Barranca. And there's like a monument for where he was murdered. And then like they dragged his body into town. So like someone recently kind of told me this, like he was, I guess, dragged behind a horse. And so by the time he made it to what is the center of town now, he did not have certain limbs, And so again, I kind of goes back to like, these are people who have had to kind of figure out their own forms of justice. And a lot of people have died here. There's a lot of I know there's a lot of lore with the town, as there is, I think, in every town in Mexico. But I live in a space that's kind of off of one of the main roads, and there's just a lot of weird energies here. One day I was in my coffee shop with my employee, and we were moving some stuff, and all of a sudden the table started shaking by itself.
Mm.
And we both kind of moved away because we were like, "Are you doing it? Are you doing it?" And it still shook a little bit. And she was like, "That was weird." And I was like, "And we're just going to pretend it didn't happen." And I don't know. There's just things. And I think it's again because there's a lot of energies here. There's a lot of tragic things that have happened here, not here just in Tequila, but like in all of Mexico. Um, yeah, there's just certain things about here that really freak me out. And I think that there is something to be said about lore, because I do think that like it typically comes from someone who saw something and then like, yeah, maybe it was a game of telephone, but there were, people who saw these things, and that happens here a lot. Like it's so interesting that you will go to a place, and even if you don't necessarily know what happens, like it gives you a feeling, and then
Mhm.
later you'll find out like, oh yeah, like this tragic thing happened here, and you're just like, oh, I don't love that, but it's interesting here because I feel like it's more of an accepted way of life. Like for example, there's this area called Los Lavaderos, and it was kind of like the area of town before everyone had indoor plumbing and access to washing machines, where people in the town would go wash their clothes. And there's this story of a name who her name I think is like Doña Felix or something like that. So she was this little tiny old lady who would go and wash her clothes like every day. Like she would do it for herself, and then she would like do it to make a living. And so supposedly when she passed, she used to have like this little bench, because she was a tiny little lady, that she would like put in front of her washing station. And people started to notice like after she passed, like things would like the little bench would just like slide over. So eventually, as a way to just like be like, we don't want you to have to do all this work, they cemented a brick there so that she could just kind of step up and like wash her clothes. And I don't know, I think that it's interesting here because everyone is so Catholic, and I think because of that there's that little bit of allure to like the things that are scary, because it's like, oh, I don't like ghosts, but tell me more, and I feel like
Mhm.
it's so common here. Anytime I feel like we're at a family function and I don't know what to say to people, I'm like, you got any cool ghost stories? And then everyone, starts throwing in their 2 cents on something weird that's happened to them.
How do people react to you? I mean, like it sounds like there's an acceptance of like about ghosts and spirits and stuff like that, but to you as somebody who is more of like a magical practitioner or tarot reader, how do people respond to you there?
So I feel like I'm not really allowed, because I think my father has some brujeria trauma, because his mom was seen as being like a spiritual magic practitioner. So I can't be super duper loud about it. I have little things in the shop that's like, if you know, you know. And like I have my business cards there, which like say that I'm a tarot reader. I will say though that I do feel like a lot of people do not come into my shop because of that. I opened a coffee shop. We are in our 4th month of operating. It's called Cafe Ghosty, and it's just a very like cute, adorable like Halloween space. And I feel like I'm trying really hard to fight against the stigma of Halloween, because I think that the problem is like in a very Catholic place, like a lot of people have just this idea, right, of anything that is sort of outside of their realm of knowledge or understanding. But I think that there are some people who are just like, whatever, guys, this is cute, you know? So I get a lot of looks. I do get a lot of looks. And it's funny, I joke around all the time. It's like, oh, you think you're brave? It's like, try moving to your parents' conservative town in Mexico and open up a Halloween coffee shop. See how brave you are then, you know? But I love it. And honestly, like I feel like I've been someone who's loved Halloween since I was a little kid. Like I remember just watching Hocus Pocus and just falling in love when I was around like 5 or 6, you know, like it's just been something that always just made me happy. And I feel like that is what the space of my coffee shop is. You know, I want it to be this like inviting space where you can come in and have a cup of coffee, be on the internet, you know, just kind of shoot the shit. And third places are disappearing in so many you know, in so many places around the world. And I just want to be able to create a space that if someone just wants to like get away from their family for a little bit, have a cup of coffee, maybe listen to some cool music, they can do that. And I'm slowly building that. I think the thing is like in Mexico, people like decide that they like things, but then they kind of make it their own way. And so it's been difficult because I'm someone who like I was a trainer at Starbucks for like 4 years, and not to say that's like the best coffee or anything like that, but that sort of I think set the standard for like a lot of places and how they create things. So it is interesting because I'll have people who are like, shouldn't a latte have whipped cream on it? I'm like, I mean, no, but if you want whipped cream on it, I can put whipped cream on it, you know? So it's difficult because this is this tiny little town in Mexico, and I feel like I'm constantly like having to change the perceptions of things that they have. And I tell myself this all the time. It's like, I know I can't change the culture. So at the end of the day, all I can do is offer like a good coffee and a fun space to be in to drink it. And I think I'm doing that.
Yeah. I mean, it is very brave because it's like you are just being your authentic self and no matter what space you're in, which I think is amazing, but I can understand that it could be pretty challenging at times as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about all of the people, family members, whatever, who came before me who had to live in a way that was like very limiting of who they were. And I was like,
Hmm.
I don't want to have to do that. And I
Yeah.
also realize that I have the benefit of because like there's a saying that they say that's like when you live in a tiny town, it's like pueblo chico infierno grande. And I understand that, which means like small town, huge hell, because everyone knows things about you. And
Hmm.
I realize that like people know things about me, but I don't care. Like at the end of the day, I think that that's the benefit that I had growing up in the States and then moving to this tiny town, that I'm like, oh honey, like your perception of me is not gonna like make or break my day, you know? Like if you think I'm a weird witch lady, that's fine. But this weird witch lady's having a great life. So
Yeah.
sorry, you know, like I'll try to be miserable around you if that'll make you happy.
I own that weird witch lady label.
I feel like I really do.
Yeah.
And you know, it's fun because I have an employee that she's super sweet, and like my biggest rule for her is like, while you're here, just like clean something and make coffees. And like it's been nice because I've been creating all of this art for the walls, and she's like, "Can I create art?" And I was like, "Yeah." So the other day I came back and from like running some errands, and she had made like four little like almost like postcard size like little portraits, and I was like, damn, this is cool. I was like, you know, like just in me living my authentic weird artsy fartsy life, like it's cool that I can inspire other people to do that. And she's like 15, you know, so the fact that like at 15 she's really kind of finding herself and exploring her artistic side, I'm like, I love that for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think it does. Like when you are just being who you are, it gives people permission to be brave and be who they are. So I think that is a wonderful thing that you're bringing in. It's planting seeds for people, especially somebody who's 15. Like they need people to show them the way that it is okay to be just who you are.
Yeah, and I think the thing here too is that there's so much of a focus of like finding your person and getting married. And it's nice that I can be like, you know, I'm a representation of what happens when you choose yourself.
Hmm.
And it's funny, my employee, she's always just like, I mean, you just seem really happy. And I'm like, I mean, I am, I am. And I'm like, not to say, everyone has their ups and downs, but there is something really nice about like living in your authentic truth and having the privilege and to be able to be a staple in the community because, I do not take for granted that I've been able to, I have dual citizenship. I've been able to move to Mexico. I've been able to utilize the resources that I have. I know a lot of people don't have that. So I feel like because I do have that privilege, I'm like, you got to just shine bright as who you are, because that is going to inspire people to live as their authentic selves too.
One of the things that you mentioned in the responses that you gave to us through our questionnaire was you kind of felt like, and this could be taken a couple of ways, and I kind of take it as kind of like a positive statement. But you said that you feel that at times you're actually kind of targeted by the paranormal. What's an example of that?
Sure. So yeah, one time I used so for a while I lived in this building. And my friends used to call it the Heartbreak Hotel because there was all these weird things that happened there. And come and find out, it's on the same street as the events that inspired The Exorcist. But I had a neighbor who passed. We used to share a wall, and I, okay, I have never heard of a situation personally like this, but long story short, he had died and he had a brother who lived like 2 floors up, but it had been like 11 days since anybody had known that he passed. And the only reason that they realized that he passed is because he didn't make it home to like Thanksgiving dinner. So a few days before, he was found, I was feeding my cat, and my cat was like having this panic attack, and he just kept running to the wall and like had to run to the wall. Like at one point I had to pick him up and put him in the other room, and he just ran to the wall and just started scratching, scratching, scratching. So I was like, oh damn, my cat was the first one to know that he had died. And so after that happened, they started moving his stuff out, fixing the space. He had lived there for 20 some odd years, so it took a while. But right after that happened, I started having really weird stuff happening in my apartment. Like, I remember I was like getting ready for work, and I was like, do I need lotion? And I was like, no, I have some in my purse. So I went to work, and when I came home, there was a bottle of lotion on my bed. And I lived by myself. It was just me and my cat. So I was like, okay, well, that's weird. Ghost thinks I'm ashy. Okay. So that had happened. And then another incident was like I was hanging out with some friends, and we were rolling a cigarillo, and I had like an ashtray just full of like tobacco. And so we went upstairs to get something. And this whole time my cat was in the bathroom laying on like a bath mat. And we were gone for no more than like 10 minutes. We come back, the cat is still in the bathroom, but the ashtray's been dumped out on my bed. And I noticed it. And my friend who was with me was like, I see it too, because she had known that I was having weird stuff happen. And so, I have a lot of like weird incidences like that where it's like something will kind of set it off. Like there's some weird event that happens. And then after that, maybe because it realizes that I've noticed it, a lot of other weird things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. And I think that that's sort of one of the things that sometimes sucks about having the hypersensitivity to spirits, is because once they notice that you kind of are aware that they're there, they keep doing things to kind of make you aware. And I don't know, it gets exhausting. I had an incident like maybe about a month ago. I was hanging out in a place with my neighbor, and I went to the corner store to grab some stuff, and I come back and he had left. Him and his son had left. But and they went to go pick up food or something. And when we were all there, he kept making this noise to get his son's attention. And it was like, you know? And so he had left. And at one point, I'm coming into the backyard area, and I'm at a space where you can't really see the rest of it until like you're straight in front. But I had been like, hey, are you here? And I hear, shh. And I was like, oh, he must be over there working on something. So I cross like where you can't see all of it. And then I see that there's nobody there. And I was
Hmm.
like, that's weird. And so I sit down and I hear it again. I'm like, okay, maybe that was just a fluke. And then I hear it a third time. And that was enough to make me uncomfortable. So I called my friend and I was like, hey, can you just stay on the phone with me for a little bit? And she's like, yeah. So, it's just one of those things where I feel like I'm just carrying on with my normal life and then weird things start happening to me. I used to live in a space where my cat would be very fixated on the back door. And then like I was talking to a neighbor and she's like, yeah, you guys, and it was one of those buildings, it was like a house that had been turned into apartments. So there were two apartments on top and there were two on the bottom. And I was talking to the woman who lived downstairs and she was like, yeah, you guys seem to have something up there because the neighbor's cat on the other side that's also up there, she experiences that. And I think that's the worst part when it's not just you, it's also your pet that feels it. And you're like, damn it, there is something there.
There's that confirmation for you.
Yeah. It's like, thanks. I didn't want that, but here we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. I feel like dogs and cats are really good for that.
Truly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you get the sense that it's like just trying to get your attention, like to make you aware that it's there? Do you feel like that there's some other purpose behind these experiences?
I usually more like, okay, so more often than not, I feel like it's just them trying to make me aware that they're there. Because I also feel like they get I don't want to say off on the power, but I always tell people this, if you are in a situation where you do feel like something's kind of like either trying to get your attention or fucking with you, like just laugh. Force yourself to laugh about something funny because it kind of creates like almost like a balance of the energy. But more often than not, it doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of like trying to hurt me, really trying to scare me. It's more like trying to make me aware. But I feel like when my aunt had died, that was more with this, I think, a specific purpose to like try to talk or make amends. But it was also like, but what can I do? Like, what do you want to do? But yeah, I think that different energies have different reasons for doing the things that they do.
Yeah.
Some of them, I think it's more like they're just kind of like, especially like children. I don't think children typically intend malice. I think that they're more so like, I'm alone and I want to play and like this and that or whatever, but that doesn't make it any less scary when you're dealing
Yeah,
with.
for sure.
Yeah, actually going back to one thing, when you talked about the tarot deck that you had helped to create, is that available anywhere by
Um,
chance?
we sold out of them. And then the three of us that were involved with creating it, we all have a few. So if anybody is truly interested, please reach out because I do have like 3 or 4 copies available still. But no, like we made an original printing of 500 and maybe we've talked about maybe at some point reprinting if there's enough interest in it. And I mean, obviously we were very fortunate because we funded it through Kickstarter and our goal was like 2,000 and we met that within a couple of days and we had doubled it by the time that, because I think Kickstarter gives you like a month or something. By the time it ended, we were at double the amount. And it was nice because, there's a lot of decks that are becoming more diverse and more like representative of all different types of people. But it really kind of made me realize that like so many people want to see themselves in tarot decks, the queer representation especially. And I think that makes sense because a lot of religion is very judgmental about homosexuality, queer expression, and it makes sense that people would want to see themselves represented in a beautiful way and in a way that honors them. So there's a lot more decks now because this was 2019, so there's a lot more decks that are more representative of people and I'm really glad for that. But yeah, I think if enough people expressed interest, I think after like maybe 10 years, because I think we're at the 5-year mark. At the 10-year mark, I think if people were like showing interest, I think I would love to do another reprint if they were interested.
Awesome.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Tarot decks really are interesting because so many decks are single printings. So like a lot of times if you don't find out about something like when it releases or when a specific crowdsourcing thing is happening, you're not going to have a chance at that specific deck. Which I think that it's kind of got two sides to it. In some ways, it's kind of cool. In some ways, if it's one that you see art and you like really love it, you're like, man, it would have been nice, So that's the
Yeah.
interesting thing about the tarot world in a way.
I think the thing that's really unfortunate is that a lot of indie printers, like they really have to scream into the void, as with any creator, right? But it is challenging because like a lot of the printings, it's either like 250 or 500. And not that there aren't creators that do 1,000, but if you don't have the money up front, it is kind of hard to finance it. And we were fortunate to have Sam, who was doing all the artwork. We were so fortunate because they knocked it out so quickly. But that's a thing too. There's a lot of decks that don't do the artwork themselves. They commission people to do it, and it's like you want those people to be funded properly for the art that they create. So it makes sense, like, because if you are paying out to so many people who are involved in the process, it gets expensive, and if you don't have the capital for that. So I would really love in the future, for there to be more companies that print or, could figure out ways, because everyone has to get paid. I understand that. But there is this demand, and there are so many people that do want to see themselves in the decks. But like you said, it sucks if you finally, oh, wow, this is really representative of me. It makes sense. Like the creator is amazing, whatever. But then like you find out about it, and then, maybe they didn't sell enough, or they still at the end didn't make a profit off the deck, and they don't see the desire to or they don't have the desire to make another printing. And it's just like, damn, and you miss out. And not that, because at this point, like Rider Waite Smith is the standard, so you can get so many different copies of that. It's mass produced everywhere, but sometimes you just want something that's a little more customized to you. So
for sure. So Bex, tell us where people can find you. I know that you also host a podcast, so tell us about that and where people can listen to that.
Yeah, if you resonated with anything that I said, I have a podcast called Tutia Bruja, and that is a hodgepodge of things. Like every episode's a little bit different. Sometimes we talk about the paranormal, sometimes we talk about music, lore, it just kind of depends what I'm feeling that week and who wants to talk to me. And you can check out my website. It is bexbcasting.com. That is sort of the compilation of everything that I do. Like if you're curious about what I bring into the world, that's the place to do it. There's like a section for all of the different podcasts that I edit or I have edited. There's a section for podcasts that I've been on. There's this, just like anything that I've done. My blog is there. If you are wanting to work with me, there's information on how to do that. So that'd be the best place. And you can find me on socials as Tutia Bruja.
We will make sure to link that in our description for the show.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
Absolutely. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and wish you the best of luck with everything that you're doing in the cafe and all that good stuff. Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.